Welcome everyone to this video mini lecture on the sacrament of marriage, and such a joy to talk about this sacrament as a married man myself, married 23 and a half years. Thanks be to God, by the grace of God, and husband and father, my primary vocation, and have 6 children and 1 daughter and 5 sons. And I'm so blessed, hashtag blessed. And I've come to understand the meaning of no rest for the blessed. I kind of like that expression. It's humorous, but at the same time paradoxical, because there actually is much rest for the blessed entering the rest of God. So I want to talk from the Catechism in this video about the sacrament of marriage. And first of all, I want to make a bold statement about this sacrament. We are created for marriage. Every human being has something to do with marriage. And every man must come to understand who he is by studying woman, and every woman must come to understand who she is by studying man. We are all meant to be married, and this is the vision of the book of Revelation. At the end of time is a great marriage between Christ and his bride, the church. So that's what I mean to say. We're all meant to be married and participate in this global, cosmic, consummating marriage between the divine nature and our human nature. And at the same time, the sacrament of marriage teaches the world our common human destiny as God would intend it. We can say yes or no to the marriage proposal from Christ. But everyone needs to learn salvation by reading the sacramentality of marriage. Everyone is called to marriage. Some of us do marry. Those of us who don't, only then live out their vocation by contemplating marriage in a different way. So if a man's called to be a priest or go into religious life or consecrated life, again, his life still has the nuptial meaning in relation to the eschatological marriage between God and humanity, but also in understanding his vocation in the here and now, whether as a diocesan priest or a religious life, exercising spiritual fatherhood and contemplating the dignity and mystery of the sacrament of marriage, even while not being married in this life. And the same for a woman if she's called to religious life or consecrated life, the same thing, that she is called to contemplate the dignity of the sacrament of marriage while not being married in this life. But then those of us who are called to this great adventure of the sacrament of marriage, we understand the drama of salvation firsthand in all of the details of life, of becoming a father and mother, even in the experience of infertility and exercising that fatherhood and motherhood in relation to vulnerable ones or little ones who are not your own children, or perhaps adopting children. I myself experienced the gift of adoption by being adopted by John and Linda Wallenfang. And so, as human beings, our lives make sense because of marriage, and they don't make sense without it. So we need to keep contemplating marriage. The Catechism helps us do so. And we look at the different sections of this marriage in God's plan and all these beautiful subsections. Also talking about virginity for the sake of the kingdom within this whole context. Second section, the celebration of marriage. Third section, matrimonial consent. And fourth section, the effects of the sacrament of matrimony. Fifth section, the goods and requirements of conjugal love. Sixth, the domestic church. Oh, what a beautiful topic, the domestic church. So I guess what I want to talk about with marriage is just a few points that I think are important. And I'm not going to get into all the canonical things, disputes. Just one main important one I'll talk about. But otherwise, I just want to keep it to the basics, the important basics about this sacrament. Okay, so first of all, there are two primary two primary requirements that constitute a valid sacramental marriage in the church. The first is consent. And not just consent, but free consent. Free consent. And the Catechism talks about this in starting paragraph 1625. Not being under constraint, not impeded by any natural or ecclesiastical law. And so the consent, better language for this is the vow or oath. The sacramental vow, the wedding vows begin this. So the public declaration of the will. I take you, Megan, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to be faithful to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, till death do we part. The inscription of the wedding vows in the canonical form of the sacraments, it begins there. There has to be the free consent of both the man and the woman. And second, then what completes the vows that express the total giving of self one to the other. When I take you to be my husband, I take you to be my wife, is the consummation of that union between the man and the woman through the conjugal acts or sexual intercourse. So when we have these two things present without impediments, there's a valid sacramental marriage. And this is what constitutes the marriage, the free consent, and we also should say the free consummation. So that the language of the vows is transposed into the language of the body through the conjugal act. The total giving of self in and through the body, where the two become one flesh through this twofold movement of matrimony. So you read in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, the two become one body or one flesh. And if God is willing, become mother and father through that conjugal unity. So then in terms of the conjugal act itself, there are two primary meanings or purposes of this act within marriage. And it has to happen within marriage for these things to make sense and to be what they are in their fullness. So the first meaning or purpose is the unitive one. It unites husband and wife in the totality of their personhood. It's not just something done that the body does apart from the soul or something like that. You can't divide the totality of the person in this way. This act is so special. What it speaks in the language of the body is the husband giving his whole self, body and soul, to the wife giving her whole self to her husband, without reservation, without holding anything back. So the church teaches against any forms of artificial contraception for this reason, because it's to falsify the total giving of self, and we'd say the teleology of the unitive meaning of the act, by withholding one's fertility from the other deliberately, by sterilizing that fertility in advance, is contrary to the dignity of the act and its intrinsic meaning and purpose. And related to this is the procreative meaning and purpose of the act. Without this, again, it's less than it should be. And so it always has this procreative expression, even when a child is not conceived in each and every act of sexual intercourse. But the married couple should not do anything in advance to cancel the possibility of conceiving a child. There is what's called fertility awareness, which is something quite different than inserting any contraception in the act. It's simply being aware of infertile time of woman's menstrual cycle, and being aware of that natural infertility is not intentionally sterilizing the act. It's just how a woman's body cycles in terms of fertility. It's something quite different than sterilizing the act from without, so to speak. So in any case, what I love about the Catechism, thinking about marriage, is everything that's said. We don't want to get hung up in all of these, we could say, more peripheral questions in sexual ethics, though they are important, in terms of trying to understand the foundational meaning about this sacrament. So what's the good news about marriage is the key question. And so what else we could say here has to do with love and responsibility of a man and a woman who, as individuals only on their own, they're trying to do God's will, hopefully, but then when they come together in marriage, they try to do God's will together by communicating all the time about, should we do this or that? Let's pray about this. What do we think God is calling us to do in the situation? And it's a wonderful adventure of seeking the will of God, living out the will of God, being on this itinerant mission to glorify God, not just on one's own, but together as man and woman, as husband and wife. And if you become mother and father naturally or by way of adoption, this is St. John Paul II said, where you cross over the threshold of the greatest responsibility, and raising these children and loving these children and guiding them, especially handing on the faith to them as the most important thing in life. You can't go wrong. You can't go wrong here with that intentionality of love and responsibility that is animated by the grace of God. St. John Paul II, before becoming Pope in 1960, published a book, first in Polish, we say in English, called Love and Responsibility. And it's a wonderful reflection on married love. It's highly philosophical, and he does get into some sexual ethics things that are very helpful for marriage and toward the end of the book. But that's a great thing. And also his work, Theology of the Body, We can't hear about this enough. It's such great theology. Again, it can be dense at times, but overall, the meaning of the message is incredibly Catholic and true. So it's interesting to see the harmony of all the teachings of the Church across all the papal documents, the conciliar documents of the Church councils on marriage, family life, and the summary of a lot of these in the Catechism is just great. So there's this marital bond with the sacrament we read about in the Catechism 1639 and following, the grace of the sacrament. It's so great to think as a married person that this relationship itself, because established in and through Christ and His Church, bears grace within it. There's grace there to receive, only if, again, we just let it flow in the relationship, in our hearts. And I love how Pope Francis has talked about marriage. In fact, he has a great apostolic exhortation that came out right after the 2-year extraordinary synod on marriage and family, the document Amoris Laetitia. If you haven't read this, it's a must read. It is incredible. Amoris Laetitia, on the joy of love. The heart of the document is his exposition on St. Paul's litany to love, 1 Corinthians 13. This is a tremendous document, and I recommend it so much. But Pope Francis, when he's talking about marriage, gets very real about it and says, there's some very important words husbands and wives need to remember to say to each other often. Things like please and thank you and I love you and I'm sorry. We have to be able to say these words. The more we're able to say these things to each other, the more we're able to forgive each other, be merciful to each other, be gentle to each other, and tender with each other. So I just love that simple advice from a man who's not married. Is just like, wow, so good. So the grace of the sacrament, Christ, the source of this grace, and some other things to say about marriage. The unity and indissolubility of the sacrament. That's its power. That it's an unbreakable bond. Nobody can say otherwise. Jesus says, what God has joined together, let no human being separate. So the indissolubility. It's not dissoluble. You can't dissolve it. You can't pull it apart. Once you have a valid sacramental marriage, divorce is not possible. Separation could happen, the Church says, if there's a very serious exigency, if someone's not safe in the relationship under the same roof. There can be living in different places, but the sacramental bond itself cannot be abrogated. It can't be undone. So and the basis of this to live happily together is fidelity, marital fidelity, and all that means: fidelity of heart, fidelity of the senses, fidelity of communication, fidelity involving important, reasonable boundaries with relationships with other people you're not married to, fidelity to this person, to this vow, to this sacrament, to Christ and His Church in and through living the sacrament out. And so St. Paul VI, in his 1968 encyclical Humanae Vitae, which deals with fertility and procreation in marriage, he talks about the characteristics of this married love with 4 terms. It's a love that's free, which we see going back to the vows themselves. It's a love that is total self-giving one to the other for the glory of God. It is meant to be faithful, involving this marital fidelity, relational fidelity, emotional fidelity, all these kinds of fidelity, that we can just focus on each other as husband and wife. And even when we disappoint each other, we still come back to focusing on each other. And therefore this love is fruitful. It bears fruit. It bears fruit in the world. The crowning fruit of marriage, the church teaches, is the child and the living as domestic church. It's a beautiful expression that the microcosm of the church is the home, the family, the parents, the primary educators of the children, especially in matters of the faith and morality. So it's such a wonderful vocation. It's at the heart of our humanity. And man, okay, I know I've talked about 20 minutes. I want to talk so much more about this, the Catechism and beyond. But one last thing I want to say from this book by Chupungo, What Then is Liturgy? Chupungo, he says that with Christ and his church and liturgy, this Vatican II document, the Constitution on Liturgy, the liturgy means that there is hardly any proper use of material things that cannot be directed toward human sanctification and the praise of God. So Catholic faith does not regard matter as evil or bad, but to be used for sanctification and the praise of God. And that we have to remain loyal to the church to receive all of this sanctification and blessing. The church in reality has always been both ancient and new, and so we need to stay inside the boat, he says, page 152, and hold on for dear life, especially when the boat rocks mightily. So these two things go together. The domestic church is strengthened to the degree that the husband and wife remain in the boat of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, the boat of St. Peter, and live according to all the teachings of the church, because they're taught infallibly, without error. We have this assurance that the Holy Spirit safeguards the magisterial teachings of the church, always with reference to the Bishop of Rome, the successor of St. Peter, the standard of infallible teaching on faith and morality. So, as married people, we need to rely on the light of these teachings and, moreover, the grace of God to live them.